So it looks like I cheated because I have two poems here, but what I really love is the space between these two poems. Um, you know those winter Sundays, if you've ever read poetry, but also if you attended Dorian's talk, you know that it's a beloved poem by many. And when I encountered it, I think in late high school or college, I think I thought the way most kids maybe encounter the poem, which is the subject seems really interesting. And over time, I began to appreciate it, sort of mock sonnet feel. I now think of it as a Haydn sonnet, one of his Haydn sonnets, because of that double turn in it in the second stanza, which goes to this idea of temperature and volume across the poem. So, when the rooms were warm feels like one turn, and then obviously the well-known final couplet, what did I know, what did I know, is another turn. So those are the things where I thought amazing. But sometimes like when you see a beautiful person down the street, walking down the street, you look to see who else sees it. Like, wow, she is fine. That kind of thing. So I began to think of the poem that way. Well, who else likes it and who else has done something with it? So that's how we get to the Kominyaka poem and many other poems, I think, who have some of this poem embedded in their DNA. So what I'll do is I'll read those Winter Sundays, and then I'll tell you the ways, if you don't see some of them already, that it's a beloved poem of Kominyaka's as well. Although we've hung out, and he knows I teach this assignment, and I've always said to him, I'm never going to ask you, because if you say I'm wrong, I'm going to say you're lying. So he just goes, So, okay, those Winter Sundays. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold, then with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather, made banked fires blaze. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? It's also true that, before I was taking English classes and just, hanging out with basketball players, and I illustrated the poem in college. I did a big painting of it, and I would just try to read it to my teammates. And I would say to them, you don't have to say anything, just listen to it. Because, sometimes with this sort of thing, what else is there to say? You just sort of hear it and you appreciate it. And so this is partly why I like to put it next to something else, so that you can just see the way it's in conversation with the world, because whether it's a good poem or not is like, that's a given. And so you sometimes just want to read it and be quiet. So let me list some of the things that are between the two of them, and then I'll read Kominyaka's and we'll be done. But there's a long list of things. You can see it in the first line, the difference between a father who gets up on Sundays too, and a father who comes home late on Fridays and opens a can of beer. That's what Jack's is. The difference in temperature, the blue-black cold versus the desert flowers and the heat of my father's love letters. The chronic angers of that house versus the quiet brutality. The two, Sundays two versus almost redeemed. What those two words are doing is sort of just totally change the quality of the temperature of the poems. The absentee mother, and that's one of the things that I just never thought about. I don't know how many times I read those Winter Sundays before I asked myself where the mother was. And she's also absent in my father's love letters, and I think that's sort of what got me to that question. And then finally, just the difference between speaking indifferently and laboring over a simple word. So what I'm suggesting is it's in the DA. Maybe it's a conscious imitation or riff, even if you want to call it. But there's certainly a conversation between it. And of course, if you were in my class or if you saw the description, what I'm interested in is like, what would that third poem be? How would you feel in that space if you were trying to write a poem that was governed by a certain temperature, governed by turns, governed by a relationship to a parent's job? So all that's to say that my father's love letters ain't bad either. That's a pretty good one too. So I'll read this one and then I'll be done. On Fridays, he'd open a can of Jack's after coming home from the mill and ask me to write a letter to my mother, who sent postcards of desert flowers taller than men. He would beg, promising to never beat her again. Somehow I was happy she had gone, and sometimes wanted to slip in a reminder how Mary Lou Williams' polka dots and moonbeams never made the swelling go down. His carpenter's apron always bulged with old nails, a claw hammer looped at his side, and extension cords coiled around his feet. Words rolled from under the pressure of my ballpoint. Love, baby, honey, please. We sat in the quiet brutality of voltage meters and pipe threaders lost between sentences. The gleam of a 5-pound wedge on the concrete floor pulled a sunset through the doorway of his tool shed. I wondered if she laughed and held them over a gas burner. My father could only sign his name, but he'd look at blueprints and say how many bricks formed each wall. This man who stole roses and hyacinth for his yard would stand there with eyes closed and fist balled, laboring over a simple word, almost redeemed by what he tried to say.